Since 2020, many people have the same feeling. Something isn't the same. The number one thing that I hear from people these days is how overwhelmed they feel. Not just busy, not just stressed, but existentially overwhelmed. A lot of people feel tired, but they can't really rest. They feel more reactive, more easily flooded, more easily discouraged. And maybe they can still do what needs to get done, but the energy behind their life has changed. Things that used to matter don't land in the same way. Things that maybe used to motivate you don't carry the same energy. And the future feels harder and harder to touch. A lot of people can feel something in them is no longer oriented the way that it used to be. And when that overwhelm starts to rise, many people instinctively reach for distraction, especially scrolling, because being alone with themselves for even a few minutes can just feel like too much. And what I want to talk about today is that this isn't just random. This isn't just in your head, and this isn't just personal. We're living through a civilizational crisis of meaning and connection. The external crisis in the world isn't separate from your own inner world. And the civilizational crisis isn't separate from the work that we've been doing in recent episodes around scarcity, lack, core wounds, and our ancestral patterns. It's actually all connected. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is From Inherited Scarcity to Living Medicine. Our relationship with existence has been shattered since 2020. What used to give life structure, stability, orientation, and meaning just doesn't hold the same way anymore. That's part of what the meaning crisis actually is. Beneath daily life, many people can feel a kind of disorienting scarcity of meaning, of real connection, of purpose, of a lot of things. And in recent episodes, we've been exploring scarcity and lack at the micro level. We looked at the core wound as that earliest programming of scarcity in the identity. We looked at the worldview that forms around the core wound to make sense of it. And then we looked at all the adaptive strategies that could get activated when the core wound is triggered. Those things that are meant to protect you, to help you survive, to help you feel safe, but that also end up limiting your abundance of love, connection, support, and everything else that you want. We also looked at the vows that you might make to yourself so you don't have to feel the pain of the core wound, which then also end up limiting your abundance and what's possible for you. And we also looked at how the core wound isn't just personal, it's ancestral. It's part of an unresolved agreement in the lineage. There's a pattern, a pain, a distortion, something that was never fully metabolized by those who came before you. And it's now seeking resolution through you as the living lineage. Today, I want to widen the lens a bit more because the micro and the macro are connected. What's happening in the individual is reflected in the collective. And what's happening in the collective is shaping what's happening in the individual. The individual wound is unfolding inside this collective meaning crisis. This is the scarcity of our era, an increasing lack of connection and meaning. And there are real material pressures building in the world too. Economic instability, resource strain, wars, disruption in global systems, and that growing sense that basic forms of stability can no longer be taken for granted. All of that is real. And even if you aren't consciously tracking all of it, your nervous system is. That's why I believe one of the greatest forms of scarcity in this era isn't only material, it's the scarcity of meaning and true connection. And that's what your nervous system feels the most. Because when meaning breaks down, when real connection breaks down, it doesn't just create discomfort, it triggers your core wound. It activates your survival patterns. It amplifies the unresolved trauma in your lineage. It touches all the places in you that learn to adapt to instability, disconnection, fear, grief, helplessness, and lack. Because even if you aren't cognitively recognizing this yet, your system knows. In the same way, if you grew up in a chaotic environment, your system became hyper vigilant of similar patterns that it reads, even decades later. Those of us who learned to read the room in childhood, we're now the same ones recognizing the signs on the global stage. And what's often called a meaning crisis isn't just a personal issue, it's also an ancestral and collective reckoning. As the inherited structures dissolve in our world, the unresolved pain within all of us is rising to the surface. That's what you're feeling now, even though maybe you didn't have words to explain it, or maybe even the awareness to recognize it. But probably what you do notice is how you're turning to distractions, anything, especially scrolling, to avoid letting the overwhelm surface. The meaning crisis isn't just some abstract philosophical problem. It shows up in everyday life. It's showing up in all of our lives. It shows up when the future no longer feels real in the same way, when your old plans don't carry the same energy, when success doesn't feel meaningful anymore, when belonging feels unstable, when institutions no longer feel trustworthy, when identity starts unraveling, when everything that you used to orient around no longer orients you in the same way. It shows up when you can technically still function, but there's still that quiet voice underneath it all asking, what's the point? And you might be noticing that many of the things that seemed so important before 2020 aren't anymore. There may be other things that over the recent years became much more important to you. That's what happens after existential crisis. In January of 2024, a couple years ago, I did a masterclass called Existential Crisis and Regeneration. And I took a poll among the attendees who were there live. I asked them which of 5 areas in their life was most impacted by an existential shattering since 2020. The number one answer was freedom and responsibility. And we've been talking about that frequently, what I call the state of captivity, which is the opposite of freedom, and a state in which most people are living, even if they're awake, even if they left an abusive relationship or situation, even if they see through everything that's happening on a global level. From captivity to liberation is the premise of my new book, Becoming Whole. The state of captivity endures until we do the inner work of true empowerment. And that's not the same as pointing the finger at the bad guys. The number 2 existential struggle in that 2024 poll was meaning and purpose. Life and death was the very last of the 5. That means people were least afraid of dying. Despite all the fear bombardment that was happening in the campaign, people were much more concerned about freedom, purpose, and meaning. So why did meaning and purpose suddenly become such a big deal? Because a lot of what used to give us meaning was inherited, not chosen. Family roles, religious structures, cultural scripts, societal norms, collective agreements about what life is supposed to be and what a good life looks like. Some of it was beautiful, some of it was fun, some of it was a distortion, and a lot of it was trauma dressed up as normality. But either way, much of it is no longer holding the way it used to because the world that we inherited is dissolving. And a lot of people can feel that even if they don't have language for it yet. Because when meaning dissolves, purpose dissolves too. That's why so many people are asking that question. What's the point? And this isn't just about meaning, it's also about connection. And these are closely related because we're a social species. So a lot of what gives life true meaning comes through connection. Isolation was the third most common existential struggle that people reported in that poll in 2024. And by the way, since 2 years have passed, I'm going to do that poll again, but this time on YouTube. So I'm going to do one in English and one in Spanish, and you'll find that as a post on my channel. I would love it if you participate if you'd like to, and I'll comment on it down the road after a bunch of answers come in. We're living in a time where people have the perception of connectivity more than ever. We can message anyone instantly. We can watch, listen to, read anyone online from around the world. We can consume endless content, which has now replaced the perpetual TV on in the background. Now we can be in constant contact in a digital environment where it's not just broadcasting, it's interactive. When you comment, like, share things online, that's very different than just watching the TV, but it's still not real connection. Interactive content and digital contact aren't the same thing as embodied connection. The human nervous system doesn't register any of that as true connection because it's simulation. Real connection requires presence, attunement, regulation, embodiment, the capacity to be with yourself while being there with another person. And you can have that to some degree in a phone call or video call, but a lot of people don't have that capacity to be present right now, even in person. Most people don't even have the capacity to be fully present with themselves right now. So we turn to screens as a surrogate, as a way to co-regulate with devices instead of self-regulating or co-regulating with other humans. And it works to some degree because your device speaks the same language as your nervous system. It's a binary code, zeros and ones. So it works as a coping mechanism to reach for your phone as soon as a sense of discomfort surfaces. But not only doesn't that heal you, it's also changing your nervous system when you co-regulate with a device. None of this is being studied by science, but this is most observable among the young children nowadays who are native to technology. They came in with the tech upgrade in their nervous system without having to learn it like you and I did. Our reliance on our devices for regulation doesn't mean we're bad. It doesn't mean we're broken. It means that we're overloaded and overwhelmed. We're dysregulated, defensive, exhausted, shut down, conditioned towards stimulation and simulation. So we have this brutal paradox. People feel more alone than ever. People are going online more than ever to find something to give them a sense of meaning or connection. People are craving connection more than ever. And yet at the same time, people are less capable than ever of actually experiencing it because of all the layers of trauma distorting the connection and the sense of meaning. This is why people feel so lost and lonely. It's a scarcity state at a personal and civilizational level. You can probably see the fallout of this everywhere now. People are more defensive, more reactive, more fragile in some ways, and also more armored in others. But armoring isn't strength, it's defensiveness. And we explored that in episode 12, the armor we mistake for safety. So when people meet, it's often not actually person meeting person, it's trauma meeting trauma. It's projection meeting projection, defensiveness meeting defensiveness, unmet needs meeting unmet needs, the past meeting the past, grief defended by anger meeting grief defended by blame. And most people are trying to get their unmet needs met through relationships without taking responsibility for self-regulation. The inner work is getting outsourced. People are treating others like a device because that's what we've been conditioned to do. And most people don't understand why things keep collapsing in their relationships, in their community, in their country, in the world. And what happens when we don't understand, we look for someone to blame. So people blame it on another political party, on another country, another religion. They blame it on their neighbors or some other person. People blame their own triggers on other people. Then they wait for a rescuer to give them the love and the security they never had. And when that relationship can't hold the weight of all that unconscious demand, it breaks down into trauma and more trauma, and the loop keeps looping. And the same thing happens in communities. People crave community now more than ever. Because after everything we've lived through in the recent years, of course, we're craving community. We want to belong. We want to feel supported by others. But communities are still being formed from survival consciousness, from scarcity, from fear, from reaction, from blame, from having a shared enemy, having a common threat, from an attempt to create external safety without doing the inner work required for real relational maturity. And that can create temporary bonding, but it doesn't create true community. And sooner or later, the community collapses or blows up from the same wound that it was built on because it wasn't built on a solid foundation. It was built on distortion, on wounding, instead of coherence and medicine. And just like in relationships, if a group is held together by projection, defensiveness, and blame, eventually that finger that's pointed outward gets turned in. People inevitably turn on one another when blaming the enemy is the foundation of togetherness. We can't create together what we haven't cultivated in ourselves. The lack we see in the world reflects the lack within us. The scarcity in the world is mirroring the scarcity within us. 2020 was the rupture, a point of no return. And this is where I want to widen the frame even more. I started noticing this very clearly in 2020. And I've spoken before about what I call the morphic rupture of 2020. But what happened then wasn't just a global crisis. It wasn't just social upheaval. It wasn't just the tyranny disguised as public health. And it wasn't just collective stress in response to the fear bombardment. It was a rupture in the field and in the human soul. It was a rupture in the underlying structures that had been holding together identities, systems, and our inherited patterns. And I want to be very clear, the rupture wasn't the wound itself. The rupture revealed the wound. Just like when people wake up to an abusive adult relationship, they often initially think that was the wounding. And it's harmful, but that relationship wasn't the origin of the wound. It exposed the wound that had been buried under the surface, a wound that existed long before that relationship. So what happened in 2020 wasn't the beginning either, but it destabilized the structures that had been containing what was already there, hidden under the surface. Personal trauma, the ancestral backlog, collective grief, false coherence, and the inherited survival architecture that we had lived our whole lives on. What had been suppressed for generations started surfacing, even though we thought it was very personal. What had been subliminal became something we could feel, even if we tried to run from it. What had been unconscious became activated, even if we tried to look away. That's part of why nothing has felt the same since 2020, because we aren't the same. A lot of what's surfacing through that rupture is grief. It's grief that's been exiled. Personal grief, ancestral grief, collective grief. So we're feeling the backlog of what had never been fully felt, named, processed, or metabolized. And on top of that, we're connected to devices in this endless stream of information about the ongoing chaos in the world, and that is overwhelming. But grief is vulnerable. And for most people, grief is not the first thing they feel because it's a big feeling that we don't want to feel. It doesn't feel safe to feel the grief. So instead, we feel frustration, confusion, anger, outrage, defensiveness, numbness. These are often the protective layers. Anger can feel safer than grief. Righteousness can feel safer than helplessness. Blame can feel safer than sorrow. Confusion can feel safer than the truth. Defensiveness can feel safer than vulnerability. Numbness can feel safer than feeling. So, a lot of what we've been witnessing in recent years is defended grief. It's pain wearing armor. And when that grief isn't recognized for what it is, people stay stuck in the defensive layer. And that's part of why everything feels so charged right now in you and in the world. It's like everyone has a short fuse. There's so much grief flooding the field. And a lot of people are still fighting it instead of feeling it. And while feeling it isn't the same as healing it, we still have to feel it to start to heal it. So when we're at an impasse at a personal or collective level, the chaos intensifies and the scarcity gets bigger to get our attention. But the chaos isn't the enemy. I see chaos differently than most people do. When we see chaos, we often instantly armor up, turn away, or numb it out because it's a lot. And in a materialist worldview, chaos only looks like danger. But in a symbolic worldview, the chaos is also a portal. The chaos shakes loose all the layers that were stuck. It destabilizes the structures that were containing what needed to surface. It interrupts the false coherence that was the baseline for what we called normality. And that doesn't mean that chaos is pleasant, and it definitely doesn't mean that harm is good. This also isn't about romanticizing the suffering, but it means that chaos can make the buried truth accessible because it will dislodge what was not built on truth. The rupture didn't automatically heal anyone, and it certainly didn't heal the world. Let's be clear about that. But it revealed, it exposed, it made the field available because our old coping mechanisms that were containing the grief are no longer working the same. And once the field is open, then there's an opportunity, not a guarantee of healing, but an opportunity. And what matters is what we do with it. The opportunity is to consciously engage with what's surfacing instead of repeating it unconsciously as we did before. Most people are in coping mode right now, and that makes sense. There's been too much buildup of personal trauma, ancestral trauma, collective destabilization, ongoing uncertainty, and now increasing global chaos on top of it all. Of course, people are coping, and coping mechanisms have their place. Meditation can help, nature helps, breath work helps, healthy routines help. Having food, water, and practical resources matters. All of that matters. But coping isn't the same thing as doing the inner work. Coping helps you get by, but inner work transforms what's ruling you. And the deeper restlessness that people are feeling but not naming is that the old coping mechanisms are not working the same anymore. And when people don't realize why, we simply double down. That's why people are turning more to distraction, numbing, rescue fantasies, waiting for someone to save you, attachment to ideologies, attachment to injustice, outsourcing your agency, trying to control what can't be controlled. These are all attempts to get relief without transformation. Relief feels good temporarily, so that's understandable, but it's also never ending, never leading to a new future because without healing the trauma, the future is simply a repetition of the past. Transformation can be incredibly uncomfortable because it means stepping into the uncertain. And when that discomfort arises, that's when most people run away or double down on old patterns. Yet little by little, more people are waking up to the fact that no one is coming to save them. There's no voting your way out of a consciousness problem. There's no rescuer coming to do your grieving for you. There's no external authority that can build inner coherence for you. The threshold that we're in is asking for something deeper to emerge. Can you feel it too? There's an evolutionary frame for this that I think is really helpful. Michael Hout, drawing on Claire Graves, writes about the transition from deficiency motivation to growth motivation. And that language really lands for me, especially connecting to these topics, because it maps onto both the individual healing, ancestral healing, and the collective transformation. Deficiency motivation is organized around scarcity, survival, getting, protecting, extracting, defending. And of course, it is. That was our old way, and that way of being served a purpose. It helped us survive once upon a time. But just like your trauma adaptation served a purpose, just like your defensive strategies served a purpose, just like your vows served a purpose, what once helped you survive can become the very thing preventing you from living differently now. Growth motivation is something else. It's more creative, more relational, more nuanced, more capable of embracing the complexity of our world, more capable of contribution, more capable of building rather than only defending, more capable of stewarding rather than just possessing. And this isn't about moral superiority. And I'm not saying survival is bad. This is about recognizing that the old operating system is no longer coherent with the conditions we're living in. This is not the world of our parents and grandparents. It's not. No matter how much we might want it to be, no matter how unfair that may seem, the old ways just aren't working anymore. And that truth is being magnified more every day. Michael Haupt also uses the language of mycelial consciousness, right? The mycelium is like the fungi and that network of connection that they have under the earth that we don't see. And what I really appreciate here is his emphasis on interconnection, distributed intelligence and resources, and the capacity to hold multiple perspectives without collapsing into only one. And that really matters in our line of work because trauma narrows our perception. It makes us self-centered. It makes us self-protective. Trauma makes people rigid, binary. We go into the all or nothing, the black and white thinking. We become reactive. That's why victim consciousness can't hold the nuance. It can maintain that the pain is very real, that evil is very real, that injustice is very real, but it can't yet hold on to all of that can be real and healing is also possible. It can hold that harm happened, but it can't yet also hold that the identity doesn't have to remain fused with the victimhood. The nuance can hold both. The nuance can hold multiple perspectives, multiple layers of truth. The layer of truth of victimhood is one layer of truth. Yes, the pain is real and healing is possible. Yes, grief matters and new possibilities are emerging simultaneously through our grieving process. Yes, structures are dissolving in the world and within us, and something more coherent can emerge within us and in the world. The capacity to hold multiple truths without collapsing into one is part of maturity. It's part of healing. It's part of the consciousness that's being asked of us now if we want to create a different kind of world than the one we've been living in. The nuance is necessary to shift from scarcity motivation to growth motivation, right? From being motivated by deficiency within us or within the world to being motivated by growth, by evolution. And that's so aligned with our work because it's the same way as it being necessary to discover the codes of the medicine that are contained within the wound. But right now, what's flowing through the collective consciousness is mostly trauma. But the more that us as individuals do the inner work of transmuting the wound into medicine, the more medicine will be flowing through the mycelial consciousness, connecting all of us. The wound first appears as scarcity and lack. That's what we talked about in the last episode. That's how it feels. That's how it sounds. That's the gravitational field it creates in a person's life. The wound distorts our perception of ourselves and of the world. It organizes your entire relationship to love, support, intimacy, purpose, safety, and abundance all through that lens. So at first, when you're in the wound, all you can see is the deficiency, the lack of, the scarcity of. But the wound isn't only damage. The medicine is encoded in the wound. And I don't mean that in a bypassing way. It doesn't invalidate the wound and the pain. It means that the wound contains a path. When you allow yourself to feel the pain, when you grieve what's real, when you see the pattern and its origin clearly, when you honor the trauma adaptation for how it once served you, when you stop confusing the survival strategy with who you are, when you allow to emerge the insight, the soul growth, the truth, the capacity that came through it, that's the medicine. The medicine I discovered in my core wound is grace. That also happened to be the name of my ancestor. This is what I'm transmitting now, a living example of this wound to medicine process within the individual, leading to greater inner coherence. Michael Haupt, who does the living coherence work at a structural level through bioregenerational communities, happens to live in a place called the Valley of Grace in South Africa. And he didn't force that. He didn't plan that. He simply arrived there. And when he did, he knew why. The medicine isn't forced, it emerges with grace. The community isn't forced, it too emerges with grace. The inner coherence can meet the collective coherence at a community level through the relational coherence of the one-on-one. And it's not one or the other. It's not the inner or the outer, the individual or the community. It's both. But the wound is the knot. And the medicine is what begins to move naturally through the field in the mycelial consciousness when that knot releases. The medicine is the wisdom, the coherence, the other inner resources transmuted from what once only felt like pain, individually, ancestrally, and collectively. So remember, the scarcity of resources isn't just about material stuff. Scalable resourcefulness is about inner resources. And the same is true with abundance. Meaning isn't something we get back by restoring the old world before the trauma, before the relationship, before the war, before the pandemic, before the digital age. Meaning isn't about returning to inherited scripts that once served us once upon a time, but no longer work where we're going. Meaning now has to become more embodied, more conscious, more honest, less unexamined, less performative, less dependent on false coherence. So maybe this era we are living in is asking us not just to believe differently, but to become different in order to discover a new kind of meaning. To become people who can feel deeply without drowning. People who can grieve without collapsing into an identity woven around pain. People who can hold complexity of truth without defaulting to projection and blame. People who can cultivate inner coherence in the midst of collective instability. This is how we become people through whom medicine can move. This is a different kind of meaning. It's not borrowed meaning. It's not inherited meaning. It's meaning through stewarding the living medicine. So to close up today, as the old world continues dissolving in real time and the scarcity wounds continue to get triggered, I want to leave you with a few questions that you can take to your journal, to your self-reflection practice. Where in your life are you still trying to get meaning from habits that no longer work or structures that no longer hold? Where are you still seeking rescue instead of building inner resourcefulness? Where is the grief waiting underneath a defensive layer? What adaptation once protected you, but is now costing you your aliveness and abundance? What in your lineage is asking not to be repeated, but to be transformed? Remember, the rupture revealed what was already there. And what happens next depends on what we do with what's surfacing. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here below, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.